Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Yeah, and it's great to be diving into this.
It really is. So I want you to imagine something for a second. Picture standing outside this rock tomb in the ancient Middle East.
Oh, man.
Right. And there's a man who has been dead inside that tomb for 4 solid days.
4 days? That's that long time.
Exactly. The smell of decomposition is literally, hanging in the air.
Yeah.
And a huge crowd has gathered. But it's not just mourners, right? It's heavily populated by the religious and political establishment of the day.
The heavy hitters.
Yeah. And they are watching this whole thing with just this mix of deep skepticism and outright hostility.
Oh, totally. They're waiting for a failure.
They want him to fail.
Yeah.
But then a single voice calls out into the dark, and this dead man, still wrapped up in his burial shrouds, he literally walks out into the blazing daylight.
It's arguably the most dramatic, staggering scene in all of ancient literature.
It's wild.
It completely defies biology, it defies logic, and honestly, it completely upends the power structures of the first century world.
Right, but you don't just get a moment like that in a vacuum.
No, not at all. That event is really the climax of this deeply complex chain of philosophical debates and secret nighttime meetings.
Explosive public controversy.
Exactly, and that's exactly what we are tracing today.
Yeah, we are going really deep into the Gospel of John, specifically, the first 12 chapters.
Right.
And just to be clear up front, we are treating this as an extensive, unapologetic exploration of the text itself.
Yeah, we're really digging into it.
We're using the World English Bible Translation as our base, but we're also bringing in the heavy analytical lifting of classical commentaries, thinkers like Albert Barnes and Matthew Henry.
Because our goal here is to act as your guides through this ancient landscape.
Right. We are not here to deliver some dry, dusty theological lecture. Nobody wants that.
No, please.
We want to extract the underlying mechanics of this text. The human psychology, the moral insight, the leadership principles.
Yeah, the existential wisdom. So you can actually apply it to the complexities of your own life today.
Exactly. And this specific text, it really demands that kind of rigorous, practical approach.
It does. Because, the author of this book doesn't ease you into the story.
No, not at all. He doesn't start with a genealogy or a geographical description like the others do.
Right. He bypasses human history entirely. He starts before time even existed.
Yeah, which is a massive flex, honestly.
It really is. To understand the human drama that plays out in the dusty streets of Jerusalem, the text basically insists we first have to understand the cosmic architecture behind it.
Right. So we're talking about chapter 1, verse 1. It's a statement that effectively shook the foundational philosophies of the ancient world.
Yeah, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Now, to a modern ear, reading this in English, the word sounds incredibly flat.
Yeah, it really loses something.
Right, because we think of a word as just a string of letters on a screen, or maybe a vibration of vocal cords.
Sure, just communication.
But that is not what is happening in the original Greek here, is it?
No, not even close. The term used is logos.
Logos?
Yeah, and logos is perhaps one of the most loaded, brilliantly chosen terms in all of antiquity.
It's doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
What the author is doing here is an absolute masterstroke of communication. He's speaking simultaneously to 2 entirely different intellectual universes.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, let's look at the Greeks first.
Yeah.
If you were a Greek philosopher, say, influenced by Platonic thought or Stoicism, the term logos or nous meant the divine reason.
The divine reason.
Okay. Right. It was the animating principle of the universe.
Yeah.
To a Greek mind, the physical universe was chaotic. It was terrifying.
Right. Lots of unpredictable stuff happening.
Exactly. But the logos was this hidden rational order that kept the stars in the sky and the seasons turning.
So it was the ultimate abstract philosophical ideal.
Exactly. But the author is also a Jewish man. And he's speaking to a Jewish audience.
And they have a completely different framework.
Completely different. They aren't sitting around contemplating abstract geometric forms like the Greeks.
Right. They're much more grounded.
Exactly. For the Jewish mind, the equivalent concept was the Mimra, the word of Jehovah.
Okay.
And in Jewish theology, God's word is not an abstract thought. It is raw, creative action.
Oh, interesting. Like in Genesis.
Yes. When you read the opening of Genesis, God doesn't build the universe with his hands like a carpenter.
He speaks it.
He speaks, "Let there be light." The Word is the mechanism of creation. It's God's power made physically manifest.
Wow. So the author is basically crashing these two massive worldviews together right in the first sentence.
He really is. He's looking at the Greeks and saying, that abstract divine reason you've been philosophizing about for centuries, I know what it is.
And then he turns to the Jews and says, that creative power that spoke the oceans into existence, it's here.
Exactly. Matthew Henry's commentary provides this fascinating breakdown of how the ancients understood this.
Oh, I love Henry's stuff. What does he say?
He points out that the term word carried two distinct layers of meaning in ancient thought. First, there was logos and diathetos.
Okay, big Greek word.
Right, which just means the word conceived in the mind. It's pure thought.
Got it.
Then there's logos prophorikos, which is the uttered word, the spoken speech.
Okay, so thought versus speech.
Exactly. Thought is this hidden internal product of a mind. But speech is the physical indication of that mind to the outside world.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. The author of this text is claiming that the hidden mind of God, the ultimate meaning behind all existence, has just been uttered out loud into human history.
Man, if we just pause right there, that is a beautiful, towering philosophical concept.
It's massive.
But, if it stays in the clouds, it doesn't really change anything for us on the ground.
No, it's just theory at that point.
Right. And this is where the text makes a pivot that shocked everyone.
Oh, yeah.
Verse 14 says, the Word became flesh and lived among us.
That is the turning point of human history, according to this narrative.
And we really have to grasp how offensive that idea was to the ancient mind.
Oh, deeply offensive. Albert Barnes notes in his commentary that the specific Greek word used here for flesh doesn't just mean a physical body.
Right.
It denotes human nature in all of its frailty, its weakness, and its susceptibility to suffering.
Because for the Greek philosophers, the physical body was a prison.
Right. Exactly. It was gross. The goal of life was for the pure, rational soul to escape the dirty, decaying physical world.
So the idea that the supreme divine logos would willingly trap itself in sweat and blood and hunger and mortality, that was repulsive to a Greek intellectual.
It was unthinkable. Why would perfection choose imperfection?
Yeah.
And Matthew Henry points out another brilliant nuance in the translation here. When the English text says, he lived or dwelt among us,
yeah,
the literal Greek actually translates to pitched his tent or tabernacled.
Pitched his tent. That is a very specific architectural choice.
It really is a tent, not a granite fortress.
Not a marble temple.
Precisely. In the ancient world, a tent implies a military campaign, a nomadic existence, a temporary and vulnerable state.
Wow.
It means the architect of the cosmos didn't arrive as an untouchable emperor isolated in some heavily guarded palace. He came as a wanderer, pitching a canvas tent in the dirt alongside humanity.
That's such a striking image.
Right. He embedded himself in the grit and the grime of the human experience.
Think about the implications of that for a moment. It completely inverts how we naturally understand power.
Totally.
Like if you or I were designing a system to rule the world, we would design it from the top down.
Oh, for sure. We'd want armies.
We'd want invulnerability. We'd want a corner office with bulletproof glass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the text is arguing that ultimate divine power actually chooses radical vulnerability. It chooses the tent.
And because it chooses the tent, it demands an immediate, visceral response from the people who encounter it.
It forces a reaction.
Which brings us to the first major human interaction in the book, right? John the Baptist.
Yes, John the Baptist. And keep in mind, John the Baptist is a massive cultural phenomenon at this point in the narrative.
Oh, he's huge.
He's out in the wilderness, and massive crowds are just abandoning the city centers to go hear him speak.
Which makes the religious elite in Jerusalem really nervous.
Very nervous. So they send an official delegation to investigate him.
Right. They show up and basically ask him point blank, who are you? Are you the Christ? Are you Elijah?
Yeah. They want to know what his angle is.
This is the moment, right? If John the Baptist wants power, they are handing it to him on a silver platter.
They're essentially offering him the keys to the kingdom, the ultimate platform.
But look at his response. He unequivocally refuses the title.
He does.
He says, I am not the Christ. And when they press him, he identifies himself using a quote from the ancient prophet Isaiah.
Right. He says, I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness.
Just a voice.
Yeah, Matthew Henry actually summarizes John's self-assessment with this famous Latin phrase, vox et praeterea nihil.
Which means?
It translates to a voice and nothing more.
Wow.
His entire identity is rooted in bearing witness to the light rather than attempting to be the light himself.
Man, when you view that through a modern lens, it is deeply countercultural.
Oh, absolutely.
Look at the water we swim in today. We are entirely consumed by the idea of the personal brand.
Totally. Everything is a brand.
We are trained to view ourselves as, like, the main character of reality. We want the spotlight, the influence, the metrics that prove we matter.
We want the followers.
Exactly. We exhaust ourselves trying to be the light for everyone around us.
Yeah.
And yet, here is a man who achieves massive historical significance by actively rejecting the spotlight.
Because there's a profound psychological freedom in that rejection.
How do you mean?
Well, think about it. If you are the light, you're responsible for illuminating the whole world. That is a crushing, anxiety-inducing burden.
Oh, man, that's so true.
But if you are merely a witness to the light, if your job is simply to point toward truth, beauty, and grace, when you see it, you are suddenly free.
That is a phenomenal insight. It really forces you to evaluate how you are operating in your own life.
Yeah, your career, your family.
Right. Are you burning yourself out trying to be the savior of your company, the flawless hero of your family, the ultimate authority in your social circle?
It's exhausting.
What would happen if you embraced the existential relief of simply being a voice? What if your greatest contribution to the world isn't being the hero of the story, but being the guide who prepares the way for something greater?
That requires a complete dismantling of the human ego.
Yeah, it really does.
And as the narrative moves forward, we see exactly what happens when that cosmic logos, now walking around in human flesh, confronts a human ego that has been meticulously built and fiercely protected over a lifetime.
Oh, this is a great transition. This brings us to a massive shift in the text.
Yeah, chapter 3.
We move from the loud public wilderness of John the Baptist into a very quiet, deeply private, and highly secretive conversation.
The encounter with Nicodemus.
Right. And we really need to set the stage here because if you don't understand who Nicodemus is, you completely miss the sheer weight of what happens in this room.
Absolutely. So Nicodemus is introduced as a Pharisee and a ruler of the Jews.
Which means what exactly?
It means he is a prominent member of the Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
And the Sanhedrin was the supreme religious and political court of ancient Israel.
Okay, so he's the elite of the elite.
He is the cultural elite. He has the perfect pedigree, the highest theological education, and immense social standing.
He's the guy who has done everything exactly right according to the system.
Exactly. He is the ultimate insider.
And the text explicitly notes that he comes to Jesus by night. Now, why does that matter?
It matters because it reveals his psychology. He's fascinated by Jesus.
Right, he's seen the stuff Jesus is doing.
Yeah, he's seen the miracles or at least heard highly credible reports of them. His intellectual curiosity is definitely piqued.
But
he is a man with a massive reputation to protect.
the ego.
Right. He cannot afford the political liability of being seen consulting with a rogue, uncredentialed rural rabbi in broad daylight.
It would ruin him.
Exactly. So he uses his privilege to arrange a clandestine meeting under the cover of darkness.
And he opens the conversation with what he probably thinks is a very generous diplomatic compliment.
Oh, totally.
He says, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him.
Right. He's trying to establish a peer-to-peer dynamic.
Yeah, he's saying, I see you, I have analyzed your work, and I have categorized you correctly. You're a great teacher.
He expects a theological dialogue. He expects to sit down and debate the finer points of the law with a promising new talent.
But Jesus doesn't even acknowledge the compliment.
Not at all.
He completely bypasses the diplomatic protocol and delivers a statement that just strikes the very core of Nicodemus's identity.
Yeah, Jesus says, most certainly, I tell you, unless one is born anew, he can't see the kingdom of God.
Now, born again, or born anew, is a phrase that has been entirely stripped of its impact by modern cultural overuse.
It really has.
It sounds like a bumper sticker to us today. But in that room, at that moment in history, that phrase was a highly specific, loaded term, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Albert Barnes provides critical historical context here that changes everything.
Okay, let's hear it.
The phrase born again was actively used by Jewish rabbis in the first century, but it had a very narrow application.
Narrow how?
It was used exclusively to describe a Gentile, a pagan, someone completely outside the covenant who was converting to Judaism.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When a Gentile underwent proselyte baptism, the rabbis said they were born again. It meant their past was entirely erased, Their previous identity, their pagan pollution was gone.
And they were starting over as an infant in the Jewish faith.
Exactly.
Wait, look closer at the implication of that. Jesus is sitting across from a blue-blooded aristocratic Pharisee, a man whose entire social and spiritual capital is based on his flawless biological lineage back to Abraham.
Exactly.
And Jesus uses the terminology reserved for a pagan outsider and applies it to him.
It is intensely insulting.
You bet.
Jesus is effectively saying, your pedigree means nothing. Your lifelong dedication to the law, your seat on the Sanhedrin, your perfect resume, none of it gives you access to the reality of God.
You have to start over from absolute zero, just like the most polluted outsider.
Exactly. And Nicodemus is completely baffled.
Yeah, he falls back on strict biological literalism. He says, how can a man be born when he is old? Can he enter a second time into his mother's womb?
Right, because he thinks Jesus is talking about a physical reset.
Because a physical reset is all Nicodemus understands.
Exactly. His entire religious system is built on physical markers, physical lineage, physical circumcision, physical dietary laws.
But Jesus is introducing a spiritual paradigm shift.
Yes. He says, that which is born of the flesh is flesh. That which is born of the Spirit is spirit. You cannot achieve spiritual reality through biological or mechanical means.
This is where I think this text directly confronts modern psychology.
Oh, sure.
Because we are obsessed with the idea of optimization today. We buy the self-help books, we download the habit tracking apps, we carefully curate our diets.
We want to hack our lives.
Exactly. We want to take our existing lives and just buff out the scratches. We want a software update.
Right.
But Jesus is looking at the ultimate optimized man of the first century and saying, optimization is a myth. The foundation itself is fundamentally flawed.
You need a renovation. You need a demolition.
Man, that is a terrifying prospect.
It is, because it requires the complete surrender of control.
Yeah.
And Jesus drives this point home with an analogy that would have resonated deeply. He points to the wind.
Right.
In John 3:8, he says, the wind blows where it wants to, and you hear its sound, but don't know where it comes from and where it is going. So is everyone who is born of the Spirit.
Meaning, you can't put the wind in a box. You can't schedule it.
You can't domesticate it. Nicodemus has spent his life mastering a religious system that he can control.
Right, a formula.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If he follows rules A, B, and C, he gets predictable outcome D. But Jesus is saying that true spiritual vitality is organic, wild, and entirely outside human control.
You can feel its effects, you can align your sails to it, but you cannot dictate its terms.
Precisely.
That brings us to one of the most striking literary contrasts in the entire book.
Oh, chapter 4.
Right. Because immediately after this tense philosophical standoff in the dark with the ultimate religious insider, the author slams us into chapter 4.
Yeah.
And chapter 4 is an encounter with the ultimate outsider.
The juxtaposition is brilliant. You move from Nicodemus to the Samaritan woman at the well.
And to really understand the weight of this, we have to look at the severe historical animosity between the Jews and the Samaritans.
It was intense.
This wasn't just a mild disagreement, right? It was centuries of deep ethno-religious hatred. Give us the background on that. Why was the hatred so intense?
Well, it goes back hundreds of years to the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel.
Okay.
When the Assyrians conquered the area, they deported many of the Jews and brought in pagan foreigners to settle the land.
Just to disrupt the culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Over generations, those foreigners intermarried with the remaining Jews, creating a blended ethnic group with a blended religion. They were the Samaritans.
I see.
And to the Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem, the Samaritans were half-breeds who had corrupted the pure faith.
Wow.
Furthermore, the Samaritans had built their own rival temple on Mount Gerizim.
Oh, a rival temple. That's a big deal.
Huge. And they rejected all the prophetic books of the Hebrew Bible, accepting only the first 5 books of Moses.
So they were viewed as heretics and traitors.
Utterly disguised, Orthodox Jews would literally take a longer, physically exhausting route around the entire region of Samaria just to avoid walking on their dirt.
That is some deep prejudice.
It really was. And yet, the text tells us Jesus had to pass through Samaria. He arrives at Jacob's well at the 6th hour.
Which is high noon, the hottest part of the day.
Exactly.
Which is a crucial detail, right? Women typically drew water in the cool of the morning or evening, usually in groups. It was a social event.
Yes.
The fact that this woman is there at high noon alone tells us she is a social outcast, even within her own marginalized community.
Yes. She is carrying a deep burden of social shame.
Yeah.
And Jesus, a Jewish rabbi, does the unthinkable. He speaks to her.
Wow.
He asks her for a drink of water.
Which breaks every cultural protocol imaginable.
Oh, yeah, every single one.
He is breaking gender barriers by speaking to a woman in public, which rabbinic law strictly forbade. He's breaking ethnic barriers by engaging a Samaritan.
Right.
And he is breaking ritual purity laws by being willing to drink from her vessel.
And she is just as shocked as we should be reading it. She says, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?"
And Jesus responds by offering her living water. Water that becomes a spring welling up to eternal life so she will never thirst again.
Just like Nicodemus, she initially misunderstands.
Right. She takes it literally.
She does. She says, "Sir, give me this water so I won't get thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw." She wants a pragmatic solution to her daily labor.
But Jesus gently presses into her reality. He reveals that he knows her entire history, the multiple broken marriages, the current illicit relationship.
But he doesn't do this to condemn her.
No, not at all.
He does it to show her that she is fully known and yet still invited into this reality of living water.
And her response to being exposed like that is fascinating. She doesn't run away.
No, she doesn't.
But she does do what we all do when we feel uncomfortable. She pivots to a theological debate.
It's such a classic move.
Right. She realizes he is a prophet, so she immediately brings up the massive centuries-old dividing line between their cultures.
She says, "Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, but you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship."
It is the classic human defense mechanism, religious tribalism.
Yes. My group's geography versus your group's geography. Who is right?
Which building does God actually live in?
Exactly. And Jesus' response completely dismantles the entire framework of institutional religion.
It's so powerful.
He says, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. But the hour comes, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such to be his worshipers."
God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth.
Yes. Think about the magnitude of what he is saying there. He is rendering the entire religious industrial complex obsolete.
Completely obsolete.
She is telling a marginalized, outcast woman that access to the divine is not mediated by a zip code. It's not mediated by an ethnic bloodline.
It's not mediated by the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem or the priests on Mount Gerizim.
Exactly. It is an unmediated, direct connection based entirely on internal reality, spirit and truth.
And notice the contrast in the outcomes of these two encounters.
That's huge.
Nicodemus, the brilliant insider, walks away into the night, seemingly confused and silent.
All right.
But the Samaritan woman, the uneducated outcast, she leaves her water jar behind, runs back into the town that shunned her, and becomes the very first evangelist.
She says, "Come, see a man who told me everything I ever did."
It is a devastating critique of how we measure human worth and spiritual potential.
It really is.
When you put Nicodemus and the Samaritan woman side by side, it forces a deeply uncomfortable reflection. What are you relying on to validate your identity?
Yeah, that's the real question.
Are you leaning on your resume, your family name, your pristine moral track record? Because the text suggests that those things can actually blind you to the truth.
Because you think you already have it all figured out.
Exactly. The people who most readily experience the new birth are often the ones who already know their original foundation is broken.
But we have to recognize that this kind of teaching is incredibly dangerous.
Oh.
If you start telling the masses that God doesn't live in the temple and that the religious elite don't hold the exclusive keys to salvation,
you are threatening the foundation of a massive power structure.
Yes. And ancient religious power structures don't just write angry op-eds when they are threatened.
No, they eliminate the threat.
They do. This private inclusive theology inevitably triggers a massive public collision.
Which takes us right into chapters 5, 7, and 8, where the tension escalates from curiosity to lethal hostility.
But before we analyze that conflict, we have to apply some crucial historical discernment here.
Definitely.
Throughout these chapters, the text repeatedly uses the phrase "the Jews" to describe the people opposing and attempting to kill Jesus.
And both Albert Barnes and Matthew Henry are adamant that modern readers must understand this in its precise historical context.
Yes, because reading this poorly has literally caused centuries of horrific anti-Semitism. We have to be crystal clear here.
Jesus was Jewish. All of his disciples were Jewish. The massive crowds of thousands of people who were following him and believing in him, they were all Jewish.
Exactly. The conflict we are reading about is an intra-Jewish debate.
It's an internal struggle.
Right. When the author uses the term the Jews in this hostile sense, he is using it as political shorthand.
Ah, okay.
He is referring specifically to the Judean leadership, the Sanhedrin, the Pharisaic party, the Sadducees, and the High Commission court based in Jerusalem.
The establishment.
Yes, these were the institutional authorities whose power, wealth, and delicate political arrangement with the Roman Empire were directly threatened by Jesus' massive popularity and radical teachings.
That distinction is vital. This is not an ethnic conflict. It is a battle between spiritual reality and entrenched institutional power.
Exactly.
And the spark that truly ignites this powder keg happens in chapter 5 at a place called the Pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem.
Yeah, the scene at the pool is just heartbreaking. It's surrounded by a multitude of sick, blind, and paralyzed people.
Just a massive suffering.
And they are waiting for the waters to stir, believing an angel causes the disturbance, and the first person into the pool will be healed.
And Jesus approaches a man who has been an invalid for 38 years.
38 years.
38 years of lying on a mat, watching other people get to the water before him.
It's brutal. And Jesus asks him a seemingly obvious, almost provocative question. He says, "Do you want to be made well?"
And the man doesn't just say yes, right? He gives an excuse.
Right. He says, "I have no one to put me in the pool."
He's totally resigned to the system he knows.
But Jesus bypasses the man's system entirely. He doesn't offer to carry him to the water. He simply speaks the command.
Arise, take up your mat, and walk.
And the man is instantly healed. He picks up his mat and walks away.
Now, rationally, this should be a moment of universal celebration.
You'd think so.
A man whose life has been a tragedy for 4 decades is suddenly whole. But the religious authorities intercept this man, and they are furious.
Yeah, they are.
And they aren't furious that Jesus bypassed their theology. They are furious because of a technicality.
They're furious because it is the Sabbath.
The Sabbath, right.
And to understand their rage, we have to understand the Mishnah and the rabbinic laws of the first century.
Oh, so?
The Old Testament commandment was simple. Do no work on the Sabbath. But over centuries, the religious lawyers had created 39 specific categories of work, called the melachot, and thousands of microscopic sub-rules to build a fence around the law.
Just layers and layers of bureaucracy.
Exactly. And carrying an object from a private domain to a public domain was explicitly forbidden. So when they see a man carrying his sleeping mat, they aren't seeing a miraculous healing, they're seeing a capital offense.
It is the ultimate pathology of bureaucracy.
It really is.
They look at a man who has been paralyzed for 38 years, and their only response is, you don't have the proper permit to carry that mat.
It sounds absurd to us, but it perfectly illustrates what happens when an institution values ideological purity over human flourishing.
Wow.
Their obsession with the letter of the law had entirely blinded them to the spirit of the law, which was supposed to be about rest, restoration, and life.
We still do this today, don't we?
Oh, all the time.
Human nature hasn't changed. We've just changed the rules. Think about how often modern institutions, whether it's corporate HR, government bureaucracy, or even modern religious groups, allow company policy to crush human compassion.
Yeah, it's just policy.
We see someone suffering, and instead of helping, we check to see if they align with our political camp, or if they have filled out the right forms. We love the safety of our rules more than we love the messy reality of helping people.
And Jesus refuses to play by those rules. When they confront him about working on the Sabbath, he doubles down.
He doesn't back off at all.
No, he says, my Father is still working, so I am working.
Boom.
This escalates the conflict from a debate about Sabbath regulations to a debate about divine authority. The text says that from this point on, they actively sought to kill him because he not only broke the Sabbath, but called God his own Father, making himself equal with God.
Which sets the stage for the massive confrontations in chapters 7 and 8.
Yes.
Jesus goes to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. This is a huge, chaotic, politically charged festival. Millions of pilgrims are in the city.
It's packed.
And Jesus stands up in the temple courts and declares, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life.
That is a direct challenge to the establishment. Now, remember what the author wrote back in chapter 3. Men loved the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil.
Right.
Why do people in power violently resist the truth? Because the light exposes their control mechanisms. It threatens their status quo.
Wait, I have to push back on Jesus' strategy here.
Okay, let's hear it.
From a modern leadership perspective, if your goal is to build a movement and survive, His actions seem almost suicidal.
They do seem reckless.
He knows the Sanhedrin is plotting to kill him.
Yeah.
He knows the environment is volatile. Why is he going into the temple, the very epicenter of their power, and dropping these massive inflammatory claims?
He is basically poking a hornet's nest.
Exactly. That's not just holding your ground. That's actively instigating a crisis.
It looks like instigation, but it is actually a masterclass in secure identity and non-anxious presence.
Non-anxious presence. Okay.
Jesus isn't acting out of panic or a need to overthrow the Romans. He operates from an entirely different timeline and authority. He fights by anchoring himself absolutely in truth.
So he's not playing their game.
Exactly. During these intense debates, the authorities mock his origins. They call him demon-possessed. They demand to know who he thinks he is.
Just throwing everything at him.
Right. And his response in chapter 8, verse 58 is the most explosive statement yet. He says, "Most certainly, I tell you, before Abraham came into existence, I am."
I am? That is not just bad grammar.
No, it is the most sacred phrase in the Jewish lexicon.
Right.
Albert Barnes points out the absolute shockwave this would have caused. I am, or Yahweh, is the exact unutterable name God used to identify himself to Moses at the burning bush in the book of Exodus. Jesus is claiming eternal, uncreated divine existence.
Mm-hmm.
And the crowd understands exactly what he is saying because they immediately pick up stones to execute him for blasphemy right there in the temple.
But he slips away.
He does.
And the way he handles this opposition provides a profound template for us.
It really does.
When you are facing intense criticism, when you are dealing with a toxic workplace or an unfair conflict, what is your default reaction?
We usually get defensive.
We attack the other person's character. We try to manipulate the situation to protect our ego.
Naturally.
But Jesus never gets defensive. He simply states the truth, refuses to be baited into their political games, and anchors himself in his core purpose.
He knows who he is.
Can you stand in the light, completely secure in who you are, even when people are throwing stones from the dark?
It takes immense psychological and spiritual fortitude.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is that amidst all the screaming, the debates, and the threats of violence, there are people in the crowd who are actually trying to listen.
Right. There is a remnant of people desperate for the truth.
The question is, in an environment that toxic and loud, how do they recognize his voice?
This brings us to chapter 10, where the narrative shifts from this deafening public conflict to a deeply intimate metaphor.
Yes.
Having established the sheer noise of the world, Jesus introduces the concept of the Good Shepherd.
He says, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep."
Okay.
And the crucial diagnostic metric he provides is this: "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me."
Let's apply this to the digital age, because the noise today is worse than it was in the first century.
Oh, without a doubt.
The moment you open your phone, you are bombarded by thousands of voices. You have politicians, influencers, self-proclaimed gurus, financial experts, all acting as shepherds.
Right, all telling you what to do.
They all want to lead you, usually so they can monetize your attention or secure your vote. It is paralyzing. How do we filter the noise? How do we know which voice is actually worth following?
Jesus provides a razor-sharp filter for evaluating leadership here. He contrasts the good shepherd with the hireling or the hired hand.
The hireling.
Yes, the hireling is just an employee. He doesn't own the sheep. He's just there for the paycheck.
Got it.
When the wolf comes, when controversy hits, when the economy tanks, when real danger arrives, the hireling abandons the flock and runs away to save himself. His primary concern is self-preservation.
But the Good Shepherd is defined by self-sacrifice. He says, I lay down my life for the sheep.
Exactly. The true leader is the one who bears the cost for the good of the community. The false leader is the one who sacrifices the community to protect his own position.
This is a phenomenal metric to apply to your own life. Look at the people you are following right now. Look at your corporate leadership, the political commentators you listen to, the mentors you trust.
Yeah, ask yourself what they do when things go south.
Exactly. When the pressure mounts, do they take responsibility or do they shift the blame? Will they take a billet for the team or will they use the team as a human shield?
It's a tough question.
And more importantly, flip the mirror around. When you are in a position of authority, as a parent, a manager, a community leader, are you operating as a shepherd or are you just a hireling protecting your own ego?
And Jesus demonstrates this sacrificial commitment immediately because the tension escalates again at the Feast of Dedication.
Okay, what is the Feast of Dedication?
This is the festival we know today as Hanukkah. It's winter. Jesus is walking in Solomon's porch in the temple.
Right.
The religious leaders surround him, essentially trapping him physically, and they make a demand. They say, "How long will you hold us in suspense? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly."
Honestly, from a PR perspective, it sounds like a totally reasonable request. Just give us a straight answer.
It sounds reasonable, but
Yeah.
Matthew Henry's commentary exposes it as a lethal trap.
Really? How?
Well, by this time in history, the Jewish expectation of the Messiah had been entirely militarized. Because of the Maccabean revolt centuries earlier, they expected the Messiah to be a violent, conquering king who would slaughter the Roman occupiers.
I see.
If Jesus answers plainly and says, "Yes, I am the Messiah," the religious leaders will instantly report him to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, and he will be crucified for political treason.
But if he says no, he loses all credibility, and the thousands of people who believe in him will abandon him in disgust.
It's a perfectly designed catch-22.
Man, that's smart. So what does he do?
He bypasses the political trap entirely. He refuses their framing.
Classic.
He points instead to his actions, the healing, the restoration of life, and then he drops another theological anvil. He says, "I and the Father are one."
Wow.
He asserts an absolute unity of essence with the divine. He doesn't give them the political soundbite they need for a Roman court. He gives them a metaphysical reality they cannot comprehend.
And once again, they pick up stones to kill him.
Yep. But he escapes because his hour hasn't come.
However, all these claims he is making, that he is the light, the living water, the good shepherd who gives eternal life, these are just beautiful words unless they are tested against the ultimate enemy of human existence.
And that enemy is death.
Which is where this entire narrative has been hurtling toward from verse 1. This brings us to the climax of this section in chapters 11 and 12.
Right. The paradox of finding glory in life through the mechanism of death.
The ultimate proof of concept. Let's look at chapter 11. Jesus receives word that his close friend Lazarus is severely ill in the town of Bethany.
And Bethany is dangerously close to Jerusalem.
But Jesus doesn't rush to heal him. He deliberately waits 2 full days. By the time he arrives in Bethany, Lazarus is dead.
And not just recently deceased. The text explicitly states he has been in the tomb for 4 days.
Which is what we talked about at the very beginning of the episode. I mean, the deep dive.
Yes. And this detail is highly significant in the first century context. There was a prevailing rabbinic belief that the soul of a deceased person hovered near the body for 3 days, hoping to re-enter.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But by the 4th day, the face deteriorated, decomposition set in, and the soul departed permanently.
So 4 days meant absolute, irreversible biological finality.
Exactly. Which makes the scene at the tomb so visceral. Jesus commands them to roll the stone away.
And Martha, Lazarus' sister, objects. She says, "Lord, by this time there is a stench."
She is dealing with the harsh, grotesque reality of death.
But Jesus insists, he prays, and then he shouts into the cavern, "Lazarus, come out!"
And the man who was decaying walks out, bound hand and foot in grave clothes.
It's unbelievable.
It is the crowning miracle of Jesus' public ministry. It is a deliberate, tangible preview of his own impending resurrection.
Right.
It proves that the Logos, the word that spoke the universe into existence, has absolute authority over biology and death itself.
The aftermath of this event is what sets up the final sequence of chapter 12. A few days later, they're having a supper in Bethany to honor Jesus.
Right. And Lazarus, the man who is just dead, is casually sitting at the dinner table.
Imagine being at that dinner party.
It would be surreal.
And Mary, Lazarus' other sister, does something that stops the entire room. She takes a pound of incredibly expensive ointment pure spikenard and anoints Jesus' feet, wiping them with her hair.
The fragrance fills the whole house.
The World English Bible Translation notes that this nard was valued at 300 denarii.
Right, let's put that in economic context.
Okay, what does that mean?
1 denarius was the standard daily wage for an agricultural laborer.
Yeah.
This means she just poured out an entire year's salary in a single fleeting moment of devotion.
Wow, an entire year's wages.
It is an act of staggering financial and emotional extravagance.
And instantly, there is an objection from the peanut gallery.
Of course there is.
Judas Iscariot speaks up and says, "Why wasn't this ointment sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?"
Right.
And honestly, if you strip away what we know about Judas, his argument sounds incredibly modern and reasonable. He sounds like a pragmatic philanthropist.
He sounds like the voice of fiscal responsibility.
Yeah.
But Matthew Henry cuts right through the rhetoric. He notes that the text explicitly exposes Judas's motive. He didn't care about the poor. He was the treasurer of the group, and he was a thief who used to embezzle from the money box.
Oh, wow. So his charity was nothing but a cloak for his covetousness.
Exactly.
This is such a brilliant, piercing observation of human psychology. How often do we disguise our own cynicism as pragmatism?
Oh, all the time.
We see someone do something purely beautiful, something lavish, a deep expression of uncalculated love, a piece of art, a massive sacrifice that doesn't yield an immediate, measurable return on investment, and we criticize it.
We say, well, that's not very efficient.
Exactly. Think of how that money or time could have been better optimized.
We use logical, pragmatic arguments to mask our own inability to be vulnerable. Cynicism is a defense mechanism against extravagant love.
But Jesus defends Mary. He says, "Leave her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For you always have the poor with you, but you don't always have me."
The shadow of his impending execution is now falling heavily over the narrative.
Which leads directly into the triumphal entry. The next day, Jesus rides into Jerusalem, but he doesn't orchestrate a Roman triumph.
Right, let's contrast this with what the ancient world considered glory.
Okay.
When a Roman general returned from a successful campaign, he was granted a triumph. He rode in a gilded four-horse chariot, wearing purple, followed by his army, displaying the spoils of war and chained prisoners.
It was the ultimate projection of domination and lethal force.
Yes. And how does the king of the universe, the Logos, enter the capital city?
He rides on a young donkey,
A beast of burden.
while the massive crowds are waving palm branches and shouting, "Hosanna!" crowning him as a political king. He is actively subverting every single human expectation of what power looks like.
The humility is almost comical compared to a Roman triumph. He is rejecting the machinery of war.
And in the midst of this chaotic, politically explosive festival, a specific, quiet detail is recorded that changes the trajectory of the entire world. The text says that certain Greeks who had come up to worship at the feast approached Philip, and they make a very simple request. "Sir, we want to see Jesus."
That is the cosmic turning point.
How so?
Up until this exact moment, Jesus has been operating almost exclusively within the Jewish world, fulfilling the specific prophecies given to Israel.
Right.
But the arrival of the Greeks, the Gentiles, the outsiders, signals that the borders are breaking open. The message of the Logos is now spilling out into the wider globe.
So you would think Jesus would be thrilled. The demographic is expanding. The metrics are up.
Right, time to celebrate.
But when he hears that the Greeks are seeking him, he responds with a paradox that defines the core of his philosophy.
He says, the time has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. But his definition of glory is the exact opposite of the Roman triumph.
Yeah.
He continues, most certainly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains by itself alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit.
This is the ultimate law of spiritual physics.
It really is.
You know, we spend our entire lives trying to preserve our seed. We protect our ego, our status, our comfort. We build walls around our bank accounts and our reputations. We want to stay in the safe, dry jar on the shelf.
But Jesus is pointing out a biological reality. A seed preserved on a shelf is entirely useless.
It has to be buried in the dark, dirty earth.
It has to break open, lose its hard outer shell, and die to its current form in order to grow into something that actually provides sustenance and life for others.
He who loves his life will lose it. He who hates his life in this world will keep it to eternal life. You cannot experience the resurrection until you are willing to go into the ground.
This is the reflection you need to sit with today.
Yeah.
What seed are you desperately holding on to? Is it an ego-driven desire to always be the smartest person in the room?
Is it a deep-seated need to be right in a specific relationship argument?
Is it a safe, comfortable career that is slowly killing your soul?
What needs to be buried? What outer shell do you need to let go of and allow to die so that something transformational and far more fruitful can actually take root in your life?
It is a profound challenge.
It really is.
And as we bring this deep dive through these 12 chapters to a close, the author leaves us with a highly sobering, tragic summary.
He looks back at everything that has happened. The cosmic origins, the water turning to wine, the dismantling of tribalism.
The healing of a man paralyzed for 38 years. A man literally walking out of a tomb.
And he writes this in chapter 12, verse 37. But though he had done so many signs before them, yet they didn't believe in him.
Despite all the undeniable evidence, they refused to see it.
Yes. The author quotes the ancient prophet Isaiah, speaking of a people whose eyes have been blinded and whose hearts have been hardened, so they could not see with their eyes or understand with their heart and be healed.
It is a chilling reminder of the power of human stubbornness.
The ultimate danger in life isn't that the truth is hidden from you. The universe isn't trying to trick you.
No, the real danger is that the truth could be standing right in front of you, offering living water, exposing your broken systems, inviting you into a completely new birth.
And your heart might be too hardened by your own preconceptions, your pride, and your desperate need for control to even recognize it.
Exactly.
So we leave you with this final thought. What miracles, what truths, what moments of grace in your own life are you explaining away simply because they don't fit the narrative you've already decided is true?
It's definitely something to think about.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.